Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, and I'm here with the second episode in the series I'm doing, reviewing all of the Vikings draft picks from 2025. So, obviously, the last episode was on Donovan Jackson. You can check that out on the podcast feed. This next one, or this current one, will be on Tai Felton, the Vikings' third-round pick. He was taken 102 overall in the draft. So the very, very end of the third round, obviously the Vikings traded down from 97 to 102. They picked up the extra ammo, which enabled them to go get Sam Howell by trading back, right? So they traded up 40 or so spots later in the draft, and then they traded back 30 spots to end up getting Sam Howell. As part of that, they ended up picking Tai Felton at 102. Felton is a wide receiver out of Maryland. From a measurable perspective, he's tall and skinny, right? He's 6'1", 183, right? So 6'1's pretty tall for a receiver, but 183 is very small overall. Or I shouldn't say 6'1's pretty tall, but it's tall enough for a receiver in the NFL. He might be the tallest receiver in the Vikings receiver room now that I'm talking about that. I don't remember exactly how tall Justin Jefferson measured in at. Yeah, Jefferson was 6'0" so Tai Felton 6'0" so they're almost the exact same height, right? That's an eighth of an inch difference. So if Felton basically matches Jefferson as the tallest receiver in the Vikings room, at least among the players that played last year. And granted, I don't know how tall Tim Jones is, but he's certainly taller than Jalen Nailor and Jordan Addison, both of whom are in the 5'11", maybe 6 foot range, I think. But that's really skinny for a receiver of Felton's height, and I think it definitely pops up on tape. I'll get to that in a little bit, but he looks thin on tape. Obviously he has absolutely explosive speed, right? He ran a 4.37 at the combine. He jumped nearly 40 inches in the vertical, jumped 10.10 in the broad. All of those numbers are really good from an explosion and top end speed perspective. So I'm going to dive into the tape here, get through some things I like about Felton, some things I don't like about Felton, and kind of where I see that he needs to progress if he's going to be a wide receiver 3 for the Vikings, right? Going to make an impact on the Vikings roster. So I'll kind of go step by step into the receiving process, right? There's your release off of the line of scrimmage against press coverage or what have you. There is your route once you actually get off your release into your route. There's at the catch point, and then there's after the catch, right? Those are the 4 main components of what you'll have as a receiver. So I'm going to go through each kind of as we go along here. From a release perspective, there's a thing I like about Felton, and that's his footwork on the release. I think he does a really good job varying footwork, varying his approach against defensive backs to try to be as effective as possible and get them off the release, right? He can move forward at the snap. He kind of closes out space with the defender relatively quickly. And that's something you want to watch for in receivers. If you see drills and stuff, players will chop their feet 500 times and then run in a specific direction. You really can't do that at the NFL level. There are a couple different types of releases. Some are slower where that might allow you to chop your feet a bit more. But what you really need to do is use those first couple steps to close the space between yourself and the defensive back that's pressing you on your release. And I think Felton does a really good job of that. I think he does a good job of using that footwork to give himself a two-way go, right? And leave either direction on the release. But where I think he struggles is with using his hands in combination of that footwork, right? So he can move forward, he can make a jab step, he can try to get a defender out of position, but then if the defender punches his hands and he hits Felton, Felton doesn't have the tools to get off of that. He doesn't have a club swim or a club rip or a rip swim or anything like that to defeat his opponent's hands. And I think, you'll see him kind of dip his shoulder to try to get around the defenders in certain cases, which is a technique that could work, but you need the hand usage to knock the defender's hands up as you're dipping the shoulder to be able to, actually get around defenders. And I think that really just kind of shows up on a consistent basis. When defenders make contact with him, his small frame, I think, comes into play, and he gets his momentum slowed very easily on those releases. So that's kind of a major concern for me. If a defender is able to get his hands on you and slow you down completely, it kind of wastes the point of your 4.37 speed, right? Now you're starting out a step behind everything else, and all your speed is good for is catching up to where you should have been at the beginning if you were able to fluidly release off the line of scrimmage and fluidly defeat your opponent's hands while releasing. So, the release game, again, I think there's footwork there that's a positive sign for Felton. And I kind of like the suddenness and the quickness he's able to move with in the release game. But there's polish to me that simply isn't there. And it really hampers his ability to beat press coverage. I think what you'd ideally have for the Vikings as a wide receiver 3 is someone who can play on the line of scrimmage. So you can use Jordan Addison as the Z, as the flanker, and put Justin Jefferson in the slot occasionally, or, flip everybody around, because I think Justin Jefferson can play X, he can play in the slot, he can play flanker. I think Jordan Addison has enough tools to beat press that he can play X as well. And Jordan Addison's a smaller type of player that kind of goes around people with press, but he still has the hand fighting ability and the athletic ability to restack players. Whereas Felton kind of gets knocked off of his mark and isn't able to get back into play. There was a rep against Villanova, right, which is a low level of competition. It's the first game I watched of him where the corner chucks Tai Felton completely out of bounds, right? So it's a press rep, and the corner gets his hands on Tai Felton and throws him out of bounds. If you get thrown out of bounds as a receiver, you're out of the play. You can't come back into play and catch the pass. Your route's basically entirely dead, and that's a really disappointing result for a player in a Power 5 school who was like, and let's be clear, Tai Felton was like extremely productive at Maryland, right? He led the Big Ten in catches and receiving yards and all that in the regular season, at least. I think Jeremiah Smith and Tyler Warren outclassed him if you take all of the playoff games, but obviously Tai Felton played like 3 or 4 fewer games than those guys did, right? So, Tai Felton was the most productive receiver during the regular season in the Big Ten, and he's getting knocked out of bounds by a Villanova corner, right? Like, I don't even know if they're FCS or Division II or what Nova is, but they are not a high level football program. That's not something you would want to see from somebody who's like supposed to be the best receiver in the Big Ten, right? So that's really concerning to me from his overall profile, and he needs to be able to gain strength at the NFL level, right? And that'll take time. It won't be something that he's necessarily going to be able to see the field and beat press right away, which limits him to being a slot player or a flanker, which limits your overall flexibility as an offense. So that's really, to me, a pretty big concern with Felton, just in terms of that physicality. Again, I think there's ability to develop in that area. He's got good footwork to this point, so he can use that footwork and build off of that with hand usage, which I think is probably the easier thing to train and develop, right? It's just reffing time after time after time on these players to make sure you do it while you're moving with the footwork. I think the footwork's a lot harder to actually develop in a player. So there's a bit of a positive there, right? In terms of, his flaw in that area is the easier thing to develop, but it'll still take time to actually happen. It's one thing to say, okay, this player needs to do this. This is how he can improve, and this is what he can learn to improve to become a good player. It's another thing to actually follow through and execute on that if you're the player, right? So it's not a guarantee that sort of thing is going to happen. It's not a guarantee that Felton's going to be able to put weight on his frame, and if he does put a weight on his frame, it's not a guarantee that he's going to be as fast as he is, which might limit the point of Tai Felton, right? So it's like it's kind of a catch-22 in either direction, where you have to thread the needle of doing one thing, like improving your strength, improving your mass and ability to stay on your line to get off of press, while also not losing your high-level speed. With route running for Felton, it's unfortunately kind of a similar thing. I think he's got the athletic tools to be a good route runner. Obviously, he's an incredibly fast player, but at this point in time, he's not a great route runner. You see the speed with him, but like I talked about with the really soft press, he can get inside of players and then he doesn't restack them. So restacking, if you think about it, right, on against press, the cornerback's lined up straight across you. Ideally, on your route, you want to be running straight, right? The cornerback's obviously in the way of that, so you have to get around him somehow. But once you get around him, say you go to the inside of him, you want to move back outside and get on your original line and get on your original path of the route. That's called restacking. It also helps you fend off the defender in terms of a catch, right? If you get on top of him, he has to go through you to be able to kind of knock the pass away. Rather than being on your inside or outside shoulder, he can kind of run past you or run level with you. If you stack him, he's going to be behind you in pretty much any circumstance, which gives you an advantage on route concepts. So even though Tai Felton's a really fast player, I think he's relatively easy to cover on vertical routes, on 9 routes, because he doesn't end up consistently restacking players. And I will say, so I was able to watch, I think it was 5 games of Felton, where he was going up against Penn State, he went up against USC, he went up against Minnesota, and then Villanova. So it was 4 games. But I also supplemented that by just watching a highlight reel for Felton because I was pretty low on him after those games. So I wanted to see a certain number of things and if he had the skill to do a certain number of things. And there are still questions I have beyond that and beyond the scope of what I was able to watch of him that are open. But, I wanted to be able to see what this player was like at his best. And I saw examples of him stacking in 2023 specifically, right? The Big Ten Network or something on YouTube put out like, it wasn't quite every single catch that Tai Felton had throughout his career, but it was like a 30-minute reel of Tai Felton highlights from his freshman year all the way through his senior year, right? So I saw multiple examples of him stacking defenders in 2023, and I thought it was interesting that I really didn't see examples of that in the 2024 tape that I watched. So I'm not really sure what changed among those circumstances where he wasn't able to do it. And maybe it's just something where it showed up in a couple highlights, but it just simply wasn't something he's consistent at. So I'd really like to see him amp up or ramp up the consistency in his route running to stack defenders when he runs vertically. As we talk about route running, there's a number of different nuances to it. That I think are important to understand or important to see from players to show that they can do it on a consistent basis. When you're running a route in the NFL, you're not just executing the line that's drawn on the paper, right? If you do that, defensive backs are good enough to anticipate what you're doing. So you have to sell opposing defenders at various points that you're going to go in a different direction than where you're actually planning to go. Or maybe you can, or if you have the movement skills, you might be able to get away with not selling, let's say, a curl route all that well if you can just turn way faster than they can stop and drive on the ball, right? But I guess you still need to sell that you're going vertical rather than stopping at a specific landmark. Obviously, the Vikings have probably the best player, like the best player in the NFL, the single best player in the NFL as a route runner. He's a phenomenal storyteller in Justin Jefferson, in the way he attacks defenses and always seems to be running as hard as possible, but also attacking in clear defined lines and angles while sharply cutting breaks. And I think that's how I define Justin Jefferson's route running, is it always looks like he's running in a specific direction and then he can break it off in any other direction that he wants. And I think that's what's really impressive. He does a great job of leaning to one side to get the defensive back to lean to one side and then breaking completely the other direction. I mean, there's just so many impressive things that come with Justin Jefferson's route running, right? But for Tai Felton, I think there are individual tools there. I'm going to get into selling routes in a little bit for him, but the first thing I want to talk about is his ability to drop his weight and turn. which I do think he's pretty good. He can come to a stop, chop his feet in the ground, and turn around on a curl route or a comeback route really well. What you have to do there is what's called weight drop, where you take your hips and you lower them. You basically sit down like you're in a chair, or you try to do it as much as possible, and that slows your momentum as quickly as possible. So he can do that and turn around really effectively. That is a critical component of route running that receivers need to have to become a good route runner. So it's good to see that Tai Felton can do that. You know who else was phenomenal at that? Laquan Treadwell. Laquan Treadwell is really great at breaking down and turning around. Now, probably part of that was because Laquan Treadwell was really slow and Tai Felton's really fast. So it's a little bit more valuable when Tai Felton's able to do it as opposed to Treadwell. But still, my point there that I'm trying to make there is that it doesn't necessarily guarantee that he's going to be able to become a good route runner. And I think he needs to put all the component packages in to be able to do that effectively. He also has a pretty decent speed turn. A speed turn is when you want to take really 3 steps until your hips are flipped all the way to the sideline. So you're trying to run full speed, have your pads down, which is something that Felton struggles with. I'll mention in a minute. And then you want to break to the outside, right? It's kind of a rounded route as opposed to a stop and a hard turn like on a dig route. But what it does is it just breaks the defender off, right? It's just you're turning outside and running in a different direction faster than the defensive back can drive on the ball or get to you, right? And what you really want to do is on that speed turn, you want to be completely turned 90 degrees within 3 steps that are long strides. Tai Felton flashed the ability to do that. So I'm mentioning these things, right? I'm mentioning I'm able to see him drop his weight. I'm mentioning he's able to make these speed turns. The problem is I don't see him do it on a consistent basis. He really can't. Like there's this one rep against Minnesota that really, really concerned me. He is trying to run a dig route, right? And it might be a drive concept or something like that. But as he runs his route stem, he gets his pads really high up, which pads going up are another tell for a receiver that he's about to break the route off. When you're running a route, you want to threaten vertically as long as possible. So if you're running as hard as you can, you're naturally going to lean forward. Your shoulders are going to lean forward, and you're really pumping your arms and legs to gain as much speed as you possibly can, right? When you're about to break, naturally, as you want to sit down, your back comes up, right? Your back flattens out and you stand up. Tai Felton has this issue where, the best receivers want to stay as flat as possible or keep their shoulder pads down as far as possible for as long as possible. Justin Jefferson's fantastic at this. Jordan Addison's fantastic at this, right? And Tai Felton really struggles to do that. So that's the first part of the route that I don't like. The second part of the route is it's a dig route. It takes him a full 5 steps to slow down and turn to the point where he's coming back in. What you really want to see is him able to take a break step, take 3 steps, and by his 3rd step, he's turned and kind of flattening that route out. 5 steps is okay, but it's a really choppy route where he takes 2 tiny steps in his 4th and 5th steps, and you'd like to see more space on those steps as he's going into the route. I also think there's not really a lot of sell in Tai Felton's game. I did write an article on Zone Coverage about this, about Tai Felton, and I kind of had some good examples there of the Vikings receivers, from Jalen Naylor completely stacking guys, which he's really good at on vertical routes, to Jordan Addison breaking down and making a turn that Tai Felton made a lot more slowly than what Jordan Addison was able to do, to Justin Jefferson running a corner route compared to what you see from Tai Felton. And I think the juxtaposition between that Tai Felton route and the Justin Jefferson route shows that Felton has a lot to learn as a route runner. So on these plays, Jefferson and Felton are both on the inside So in Felton's case, is the third wide receiver, right? The number 3 wide receiver. So there are 2 receivers outside. In Jefferson's case, it's 1 wide receiver outside of him after motion, but they're running corner routes from that inside leverage position, right? And they both have an inside stem to the route and then break outside. It's just so readily apparent the difference between Felton and Jefferson when you see these two kind of side by side. Felton runs at the safety, which is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to attack the safety. And then he takes one kind of half step, or one hard step that's pretty much straight on. It's maybe tilted a little bit to the inside, but it's pretty much straight on. And then the way he turns is a complete arc around. Like it's like he's running around a hoop or running the arc rather than a tight, very intentional turn as the route happens. And Justin Jefferson looks kind of completely different as he's running this route, right? And Felton's pads are high the whole time. It's just kind of a mess. On Justin Jefferson's route, he really digs into that vertical phase, gets going vertical. That helps push the deep safety off of him, and then he takes a very hard step with his inside foot, the one that's towards the center of the play where the ball was snapped, towards the middle of the field. And this gets the safety to move very clearly towards the middle of the field. If you watch the safeties, it kind of tells you everything you need to know between these two plays on how these guys are selling these routes. On Felton's route, the safety flips his hips towards Felton and drives immediately on the corner route that Felton was running. And on Jefferson's route, you can see the safety take a full step inside before realizing that Jefferson's breaking to the outside and turning back out over that route by Jefferson. On the Minnesota play, on the Felton play, he does end up wide open because that safety gets pulled by another coverage responsibility and there wasn't kind of anything underneath. But like it clearly to me wasn't because of the route that Felton was running. If you watch Jefferson, I talked about Felton having that rounded angle on the route. Jefferson sticks his foot in the ground and runs at a straight line towards the sideline. It's a little bit angled down the field, but it's a straight line towards the sideline because he's got sharp breaks and he kind of has, to me, a much better understanding of route running at this phase. Now, it's a no-brainer to say Justin Jefferson has a much better understanding of route running. Tai Felton, he's got a better understanding of route running than anybody else on the planet, right? But it's still a concern for Felton that he looks, to me, so sloppy in all of these routes. And I've kind of talked about the different aspects of that. I think he needs to get better pad level as he's going through the breaks. And I've seen in the mini camp or whatever, definitely I remember in Jordan Addison's first year, like him and Jefferson going back to back on this drill where they have this bar where it's kind of like a reverse hurdle, right? Where you need to get your pads down under it as you're running the route. I think that'll really help Tai Felton as he tries to develop that better pad level. But I also need to see him kind of have an understanding or gain an understanding of how to sell the route to the defensive back. And I think that's a lot more difficult to learn as a receiver, to, have exaggerated steps, to use shoulder fakes, to try to get your opponent moving the wrong direction before you break in the other direction. I think the athletic tools are there for Felton to be able to make sharp breaks. But I think he doesn't use them in concert together to actually tell a story running a route. And that's where I see the big problem right now. Because the speed is fantastic, right? You can't teach the speed that Tai Felton has. You can theoretically teach the route running. Whether or not it's actually going to happen in practice is kind of up for us to see as things go along. Another component of route running, and this is kind of a different skill, right? Is running in zone or running against zones. You have to have an understanding of the timing of the offense, of when the quarterback is looking at you, when you need to get to the window, where defenders are going to be and where they're going to move. I thought Felton actually did a pretty decent job of running routes against zone. There was a really nice touchdown that he had against USC where he's running a glance route and he he paces it perfectly to hit the window between two defenders, makes the catch, and it turns upfield and fights after contact through a touchdown. Like, this was by far the best after contact play I saw from Tai Felton. He fought through two defenders who were coming on either side. They had an easy tackle attempt to me at him, and he was able to fight through them to the point where it got stood up in one of those scrums, and Felton's teammates were able to come there and help him get into the end zone. Really great after catch play, really good timing on the route for that. Felton also, to me, showed the ability to work after, and there are other examples of Felton, like sitting down in zones and things like that, where I thought he was able to find space against zone. So that's certainly useful for the Vikings because they face a fair amount of zone. Kind of mostly cover two, but it's like you obviously need to find space against zone. Nobody plays man over 50% of the time in the NFL, right? So, like, even if, obviously you need to beat man coverage and zone coverage in the NFL. Maybe I don't need a qualifier to that statement, right? But I think Felton also works well against zone, after the initial play breaks down. There was a screen that Maryland was running against USC as well, where Felton was supposed to be the target on the screen, and USC sniffed it out completely. Like, the quarterback couldn't make the throw immediately because it would have been like an Andrew Van Ginkel pick six with how well this screen was sniffed out. And Felton actually, to his credit, kept working and found space and ended up getting a very solid gain because he worked kind of inside and up the field and found space over the middle. I do think there were a couple instances where Felton needs to grow his zone feel. Like I said, I thought generally it was pretty good, but there was a play against Minnesota where he was running a dig route and he stopped kind of right at a defender. I thought he could have continued to work underneath a defender, but the quarterback, so he kind of slows down and the quarterback throws the ball in front of him and it's an incompletion because the ball Felton wasn't where I think the quarterback expected the ball or expected him to be. Now, it could have been an inaccurate throw for the quarterback, and these quarterbacks in Maryland were not good. So I'm open to the idea that it was an inaccurate throw, but I think the throw was wide because of where Felton ended up seeing in zone, or where Felton ended up finishing his route in zone. There were also a couple plays where Felton was trying to cross the field and he ran directly into an opposing linebacker. That certainly needs to be cleaned up. When you're running a crossing route as a receiver, your goal is kind of to go underneath the first linebacker and stack back upfield and go over the second linebacker if they're in zone. And Felton ran into opposing linebackers kind of, multiple times on the tape. So it's kind of a concern to me that, immediately at the snap, he wasn't recognizing, maybe the correct position that he needed to get to, or the correct landmark that he needed to get underneath the linebacker and then go back over top of them. So those are a couple zone feel things I think he can improve, but generally his ability to sit down in zone and find open space, I think, was pretty good. Again, it's kind of like there's a lot of room for improvement with Tai Felton here, right? I think his zone feels better than his current route running, but I still think there needs to be improvement. One thing I did like from Felton was his catch technique. I think he does a really good job extending his hands away from his frame, going up and catching the ball. There's a really nice play that Kevin O'Connell highlighted against Villanova where he kind of jumps up on a ball that's kind of thrown up as a jump ball, and he high points it way over his head. The defensive backs catches the ball, transitions very quickly into a runner, and gets 20 to 30 yards after the catch on this vertical pass. That was highlighted in the Vikings put out a video with Kevin O'Connell going over some plays from each of the Vikings draft picks. It was kind of highlighted there. That was something I saw that definitely was a fantastic catch. I think he extends his hands away from his body very well. I think he has good underhand technique and kind of shows Right? So, if the ball's at your chest, or higher, you probably want to go with overhand technique to catch the ball. And if it's below that, at the belt or lower, you want to use underhand technique. I think he extends out from his frame in both instances, makes really good catches on those plays. But and he's got good catch radius too, right? He can extend outside of his frame, in front of him, behind him. If he's running across the field, he can adjust to a throw that's kind of inside of him, right? That he has to slow down half a step maybe to catch. He's pretty good at making those adjustments. I think all of it's pretty good. There were a couple situations where I felt like maybe he got the ball knocked out because he was a bit slight in terms of contact. I know his contested catch percentage per PFF was pretty bad. They ended up charting with 8 drops. The thing is, of the games that I watched, he was only charted with 1 drop per PFF, right? So I could be missing a significant drop issue just because I didn't have access to the tape of the games where Felton had his drop problems, right? So I generally really liked what I see. If I had to guess, his drop issues were more of a concentration thing than a technique thing, because I thought his technique was pretty good. But I'm open to the idea that there's something that I'm missing from a technique perspective, or maybe it's possible it was something that was cleaned up throughout the season from a technique perspective, although we have a pretty good range of games that I watched that he played. It's not, all concentrated at the end of the season. That could mean he's got worse hand technique than I kind of grade him as having, because, I just didn't see the drops. And obviously the 30-minute highlight reel isn't going to show me Tai Felton's drops, right? So I don't really have a great way to say that. I think he's got a pretty low contested catch rate as well. That wouldn't surprise me, given his frame, but I did see some decent contested catches, in this. Like I said, I think he's got pretty good catch technique. I think he maintains that through contested catches, but he had a really low contested catch win rate. PFF had him at 38.9% on, which is 7 of 18, right? So the technique's good, just more strength and more ability to withstand hits is, I think, what I want to see from him on the contested catch front. If you go to after the catch, right, I think this is where Felton is sold as a really good player, and I have some reservations compared to maybe what other people have said about him as an after the catch player. If you look at, again, the video with Kevin O'Connell, Pete Bursich, the Minnesota Vikings put out, they highlighted this really phenomenal play from the UConn game, which I think was in 2024, of Maryland playing UConn, where Tai Felton takes a hitch route, breaks a tackle, gets around another defender, and outruns everybody to the house, right? It's a fantastic display of his track speed. It was a great job breaking a tackle or 2 tackles and getting outside and getting past everybody and scoring a touchdown on that play. That is not what you see consistently from Felton throughout the tape. I don't think he is incredible at breaking tackles. He has a couple of moments where he does a really good job, but usually, it's kind of working across the field inside when he's doing that, and he doesn't gain a ton of yards after catch, even if he does break a tackle from somebody. I do think he shows some pretty basic good things, right? There were a couple plays where, especially on curl routes, he feels where the defender is on his back, and he's able to turn away from the defender, get extra yardage, and get downfield. I think he's got some short area agility. I think he can kind of move side to side and get around defenders pretty effectively. Where I think he falls short, and again, I talked about his speed, which I think is clearly elite. And it allows him to pull away from defenders on the defense. But where I think he falls short is in reading out the plays. So on screens, you have a specific setup where your blockers, usually wide receivers for a receiver screen, are trying to push the defenders in a certain direction, right? So if it's a tunnel screen, they'll try to push the defenders out towards the sideline. If it's a bubble screen, they'll try to push the defenders back in. I thought Tai Felton consistently missed his reads on those sorts of plays, and on tunnel screens where he's supposed to go inside, ended up going outside and kind of towards the defender's leverage against his blockers. To me, that's a really big no-no for an after catch because it minimizes your chances of making a big play. You want to follow your block. It's just like being a running back. You want to follow your blockers, and that's what's generally going to lead you to success. It may, allow you to juke guys and make a guy or two miss and juice up your force miss tackle numbers, right? Or broken tackle numbers, but it doesn't actually lead to successful plays consistently. So it's kind of interesting that when a defender is on his back, he's a lot better at finding the space and getting yards after the catch than when he has the picture in front of him. And that kind of makes me concerned for his punt return or his kickoff return capabilities as well, right? Because he's got, some side-to-side wiggle. He's got some wiggle. He can make defenders miss. He's extremely fast in a straight line. But if he's not reading the blocking correctly, I have a concern of his ability to actually make big plays in that scenario, because you're just going to end up running into defenders and maybe you make the first guy miss, but then the second guy's going to be there and you're going to have a really hard time making him miss. So that was kind of everything from the start to the finish of the catch with Tai Felton. And I've got one more thing, which is obviously blocking. I haven't talked about it all. Tai Felton's effort in blocking is good. That's a compliment. You need to have at least a minimum effort to be able to be put on the field as an NFL player, in my opinion. In the Vikings offense, they like to have their receivers block. I think Jordan Addison has done a fantastic job recently as a smaller player who learned to be physical in the blocking game and does a really good job, honestly, currently as a blocker. And I thought he was an okay blocker coming out of school as well. Tai Felton, again, is a very willing blocker. He'll go up and hit guys. He'll try to use positioning to take guys out of the play. He just gets completely overpowered like all the time. Defenders disengage from him immediately. There was a good rep against, I think it was Penn State, where he looked for work downfield. Like I don't remember if it was a run play or what, but he executed his assignment. His defender was kind of out of the way where the defender wasn't even there. And then he found a safety deep downfield, which could help spring a massive gain in the running game. And he goes up and blocks this guy and frames him up. And the guy immediately swipes his hand away, disengages, and makes the tackle on the running back. Like, the thought process, the effort is there for him to get there, get in position, and try to make a block. The execution of the block from a technical perspective in terms of getting his arms in there, and then from a strength perspective in terms of being able to latch onto the guy, simply wasn't there. There was a play where the slot corner just completely ran him over. Like, it's pretty embarrassing. He got knocked on his behind on that play. There's another example where he just struggles to completely frame up and close the space and get there. He did have a really nice block against Villanova, who I just, criticized him earlier for getting overpowered towards the sideline, where he stuck in there, got to a safety blitz and knocked the safety to the ground. Right. So there's kind of maybe a little bit of a boom bust nature to Felton's blocking game, right? But it's a lot more, unfortunately, on the bust side, where he, just doesn't have the natural strength right now to be able to hold up consistently as a blocker. So if you want to sell yourself that he's going to be able to get stronger and maintain that athleticism, I think there's really, really high upside for Tai Felton. If I go down it, I like his footwork at the releases. I think he needs to grow in using his hands to, get better, to get better at releasing, right? To kind of defeat what the defensive back is able to do in terms of stopping his momentum. I'd love to see him add some more mass, and it doesn't need to be, 20, 30 pounds, but 10 pounds maybe to get up to around 200 pounds or in the 190s, to be able to not get knocked so far off of his landmarks when he's getting hit by defenders in press coverage, right? When he's getting knocked off of his spots by defenders in press coverage, I think would really, really benefit his game in that area. As a route runner, I think the toolbox or the athletic movement ability is there, right? He can make the cuts. He can do all the physical movements he needs to become a good route runner. He just needs to learn how to sell it, right? He needs to be able to keep his pads low. He needs to be able to make sharp breaks. And even on like speed outs, right? You can't be lazy and drift back on the field. He needs to be able to make sure he comes back to the football. He needs to use head fakes, shoulder fakes, that sort of thing to sell his route to his opponent so his natural athletic ability can kind of take over and create separation for him. From a hands perspective, he needs to get stronger and actually be able to withstand hits while he's catching the football and kind of make contested catches. And then, after catch, like, I think, he needs to be more consistent at breaking tackles in the way that he can sometimes. He needs to be more consistent in how he's reading things out. He's got all the athletic ability in the world to be a dangerous after catch threat. He's got the wiggle to be able to do it, even if it's not like elite wiggle, right? I talked about his great jumps and all that stuff. His 3-cone was like or his short shuttle was like a 4.27, which whenever your short shuttle's approaching your 40 time, which is like a 4.37, that's kind of a bit of a concern from an athletic wiggles perspective with Felton. But at the end of the day, he's got all the athletic tools to become a good receiver. I just don't think he is yet, unfortunately, which makes this kind of a project pick, and I'm a little bit less comfortable with making a project pick. And unfortunately, like, it's a little frustrating to me that my tone has been like pretty negative, I think, throughout this. And I don't want to be negative about Vikings players, but I think with the investment that the Vikings put in Felton, I don't see a player who was worth that level of investment because of all the limitations that he currently has and because of all of the things that he needs to be able to do to grow. I'm going to talk about Gavin Bartholomew later, who I'm really high on for a 6th-round pick. Note I said for a 6th-round pick, and I kind of feel like if Gavin Bartholomew were a 3rd-round pick, I think I'd probably be killing him. So maybe I need to be a bit more cognizant of that when I'm talking about this, right, from a philosophical perspective, where I think the upside is really, really high for Tai Felton, right? I think he can do anything you want a top-level receiver to do. I just am not sure he's going to ever become consistent enough to actually be that player, right? And it's probably, for me, not a bet that I would have made at the end of the 3rd round. There could also be a larger discussion where I would have liked to see the Vikings add a corner in this draft, and clearly they didn't think about doing that. And maybe that's coloring my opinion on the pick a little bit as well, where I didn't see receiver as that big of a need, and I saw corner as a pretty glaring need, and they addressed a position I didn't think they really needed with a player I don't think is, and it's hard, right? I don't think is someone who is likely to live up to the billing of a 3rd-round pick, of somebody you want to at least become a rotational player, right? As a 6th-round pick, you're happy if that player makes his team. As a 3rd-round pick, and again, I guess you could argue, it's 102 overall. Technically, that's like a 4th-round pick or whatever, but it's still the 3rd round, right? It's still day 2. It's the 2nd pick the Vikings made in this draft because they traded away their natural 2nd and 3rd round pick, right? Like, this is a player who has to have a significant impact for you. And I don't know if he's going to be able to provide that. So that's kind of where I fall on the Tai Felton pick. Again, I see tons of upside. I think, the highest outcome for Tai Felton is a really excellent player and somebody who's worth way more than the end of a 3rd-round pick. So I think there's some credit to the draft pick to that respect, in that there's a lot of upside to this. I just think your median outcome, right? Your like average outcome or like your most expected outcome, to me, is going to be lower than what a third round pick is. So he's got a lot to learn. From a release perspective, from a route running perspective, he's got a lot to grow from a strength perspective in order to make contested catches and become a good blocker. But the tools are there, right? The individual pieces that you need to put together are there. We just need to fill in the gaps, glue it all together and making it into something that can become a really, really good wide receiver with Tai Felton. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. The next pod I'm going to do is on Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. That'll probably be out next week. So you can follow me, Matt Freese, at Fries Football on Twitter. You can follow my co-host, Nick Olson, at Nick Olson NFL. Sorry, I'm on BlueSky. I don't really use Twitter anymore. Nick is on Twitter. You can follow the show at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. It's also on BlueSky. We're available on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also available on YouTube. And with that, Skol Vikings.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.